On October 18th, Jennifer Kupiec, just 24 years old, left Brighton for East Lansing, planning to meet a friend for lunch and to swing by her alma mater, Michigan State University, to buy a sweatshirt. She was relaxing into the drive, soothed by the familiar hum of the road and the even tempo of her tires thumping on its seams. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the window in another car rolled down, and to her shock, a handgun appeared. She remembers a single second stretching out, then the pop of a shot, and then the sick, hot realization that the rim of her driver's side window had been grazed. She remembers pulling over and breaking down on the shoulder, shaking, the world suddenly too loud and seeming too small. All she could think about was, that could have been me. If I hadn't been speeding, it would have hit me squarely in the ribcage. In the weeks that followed, anything with an interstate tag or an MSU bumper sticker caused her heartbeat to skyrocket as she relived that moment over and over again. Over the course of a few weeks in 2012, ordinary drivers going about their daily routines found themselves in the crosshairs of an unknown gunman, turning one of Michigan's busiest highways into a corridor of fear. This is the story of the I-96 spree shootings, a case that gripped an entire region with panic. Interstate 96 is a major artery connecting Grand Rapids, Lansing, and Detroit. It's a roadway familiar to countless Michiganders. Parents drive their kids to school along its routes. Commuters rely on it to get to work. Fans travel on it on weekends to attend pro sports games. It was ordinary, safe, until suddenly, it wasn't. In mid-October, drivers began reporting something almost unthinkable. Their cars were being shot at, apparently at random, by somebody they couldn't even see. On the evening of October 16, 2012, as dusk fell, the first reports crackled over police radios. A driver on I-96 thought someone had shot at his vehicle. Within hours, similar calls began coming in from nearby roads. At first, the reports sounded like nightmares, just urban legends. Bullet holes found in car doors, a back windshield shattered seemingly out of nowhere. Many motorists didn't realize what had happened until much later. One man thought he just got a flat tire on the freeway, only to discover a spent bullet lodged in his wheel. Bullets struck cars on the interstate itself, but also on parallel routes like Wixom Road, M52, and others near the highway. It didn't matter if it was broad daylight or night. The shooter, or shooters, seemed to pick targets whenever the opportunity arose, often firing from a passing car heading the opposite direction. Imagine driving eastbound and a car going westbound opens fire at you across the median. That's how brazen these attacks were. Almost all the reports of shootings were coming from motorists. However, one man narrowly avoided getting shot at home while simply taking his trash out to the street. By the end of that week, law enforcement was stunned to realize they potentially had 24 shooting incidents on their hands across 4 Michigan counties: Oakland, Livingston, Ingham, and Shiawassee, all clustered around the I-96 highway corridor between Lansing and Detroit. Each panicked 911 call about shots fired on the highway sent a ripple of terror through the community. It felt like it was only a matter of time before the worst happened. If you're thinking this sounds like the plot of a thriller, you're not alone. These random attacks immediately evoked memories of the Washington, D.C. sniper shootings that left 10 people dead at gas stations and highways just a decade earlier, which we covered in another video on this channel. The idea that a sniper, or multiple snipers, could be stalking random drivers in Michigan was enough to make even the most logical people start looking over their shoulders. The shootings turned the mundane act of driving into a potential life-or-death gamble. It wasn't happening in a war zone or a high-crime neighborhood. It was happening on the same interstate where they carpooled with their kids and drove to the grocery store. The emotional stakes were enormous. Every parent who heard the news imagined just how it could have been their family minivan in the crosshairs. Every commuter wondered if tomorrow's drive might be their last. We often assume we're safe in our daily routines, but this case shattered that illusion. And as we'll see, it became a personal story for countless people, from the victims dodging bullets to the officers hunting the gunman. and even the shooter's own family desperately trying to understand how one of their own loved ones could unleash such chaos. Early on, confusion reigned. No one actually saw the shooter clearly in those early incidents. Some victims heard a loud pop or a crack, but by the time they realized it wasn't a blown tire or a rock hitting the glass, the perpetrator was gone. In fact, many victims didn't even report the incident immediately. Some only discovered their cars had bullet damage later and then called the police. This delayed recognition meant that the police were piecing together the puzzle in real time, figuring out days later that dozens of earlier car troubles were actually bullet strikes. What they did know was chilling. A single unknown assailant was likely responsible for all of it. The tight clustering of shootings in the space and time suggested it wasn't a coincidence. Forensic teams collected bullet fragments and shell casings from various scenes and quickly determined that many of them came from the same type of weapon, a 9mm handgun. These bullet fragments were quickly sent to the lab to be analyzed. Within a week, investigators had linked together at least 9 of the incidents from this ballistic evidence, confirming that one person was on a shooting spree throughout Michigan. The picture emerging was that of a mobile sniper, striking at random. It was the kind of nightmare scenario that even veteran cops rarely encounter. Oakland County's sheriff at the time, Michael Bouchard, held a press conference and disclosed an unsettling tally to the community. There were 22 confirmed shootings, all between October 16th and 18th. Miraculously, though, not a single one had resulted in a fatality, or even an injury, which begged the question, was this person intentionally missing occupants, just trying to aim to scare them? Or was it by sheer luck that no one had been hit yet? In neighboring Livingston County, Sheriff Bill Bizotte had his own opinion. He said, when you shoot at somebody, your intention is to kill them. That's plain and simple. He's out there trying to kill people. By now, the pattern was clear enough that police across the region issued warnings, and the media blasted alerts about a possible highway shooter that was at large.
Of course, it is so fortunate that no one's been injured so far, but one man came close, about this close. When Aaron Mason realized a bullet lodged in the seat he was sitting on, when he realized his Ford Edge had been shot at while he was driving on Wixom Road, he was understandably shaken but feeling fortunate.
Thankful I didn't get hit by a bullet.
It happened Thursday afternoon about 2:15.
Heard a loud kind of a boom and something hit my car, and I pulled over. I thought maybe my tire blew out or my windshield blew out. Walked around the car, there was no damage, and then when I went to get back in the car, there was a bullet hole in the side of the car. At first, I couldn't believe that it was a bullet hole, so one of the guys from work came up and he said, yeah, because it went right through the car door into my car seat.
Even though, statistically, the chances of any given driver being targeted were low, rational calculations meant little in the face of such a bizarre threat. As psychology expert Dr. Brad Bushman noted at the time, these kinds of rare, random crimes stick in our minds in a way that far outweighs their frequency. People were vividly imagining the worst, because it was so unpredictable. One high-profile danger made folks think any trip down I-96 could be their last, the one where a bullet finally finds them. A palpable sense of panic gripped communities along I-96. The corridor that the shooter prowled wasn't some deserted stretch of rural road. It cut through one of Michigan's most populous regions. Normal activities in the towns of Wixom, Brighton, Howell, and Fowlerville were being disrupted by the terror. Schools changed their bus routes and went into precautionary lockdowns in some areas, rerouting student transportation to avoid highways and exposed roads. Sports fans and weekend travelers started canceling their plans or taking long detours on back roads to avoid I-96. A trip that might normally take 30 minutes on the interstate could take twice as long on side roads, but many felt it was worth it. No destination seemed as important as avoiding a potential sniper's bullet. The police tried to walk a fine line with their public messaging. Don't be afraid to drive, but do remain vigilant, is what they urged. But it was easier said than done. How do you stay vigilant against a threat you literally can't see coming? Law enforcement increased patrols along the corridor, with marked and unmarked cars prowling for anything suspicious. For the public, each day without an arrest was another day full of tension. The shooter had gone silent after October 18th, and some dared to hope maybe it was over. Maybe a drifter was passing through. and left. But those hopes were shattered on Saturday, October 27th, when the gunman resurfaced. Around 11:30 in the morning, two 18-year-olds were driving near the Fowlerville exit when a bullet tore through their rear driver's side window. Both the driver and passenger were uninjured, although likely traumatized. Just 30 minutes later, Scott Arnold, a 46-year-old father, was heading east towards Detroit on his way to a Tigers game when a bullet tore into his car near the same exit. The round punched through the driver's side door and struck Arnold in his upper leg. Bleeding and stunned, he managed to pull off the road and seek help at a gas station, where his staggering entrance was caught on the security cameras. He was hospitalized but released the following day, still reeling at the randomness of what had happened. He said, "It was pure luck. I feel very, very fortunate, and my kids do too," reflecting on just how narrowly he escaped a fatal wound. Doctors decided not to remove the bullet from his hip, so it remains a grim souvenir of the shooter's escalation. This broke the uneasy calm of the past week and proved the nightmare wasn't over. In fact, it cranked the community's fear into overdrive. If luck had run out and someone was now hit, what could happen next? Who could be next? People started calling the assailant the I-96 shooter, or even the I-96 sniper, recalling the moniker of the DC Beltway snipers. Local news ran constant segments. Social media buzzed with rumors. Some claimed there were multiple gunmen. Others speculated it was a terrorist plotting something bigger. Halloween came and went under this cloud of anxiety. Many parents in affected areas refused to drive their kids to trick-or-treat events that involved the highway. At one point, a $102,000 reward was posted for any information leading to the shooter's arrest, an enormous bounty reflecting just how desperate authorities were to get a solid lead. Over 2,000 tips flooded in within days, jamming phone lines. The challenge for investigators was to sift actual leads out from the rest of the noise. On October 29th, at 9:55 a.m., the Detroit News tweeted out, "Michigan State Police are investigating a shooting of a vehicle on southbound US 23, just north of I-96, near Brighton. A motorist had reported a bullet hitting her car. Authorities moved quickly to shut that section of the freeway down. Local schools went into lockdown, keeping students inside during recess while the threat seemed imminent. By 1 p.m., the investigators concluded it was a false alarm. What the driver had heard might have just been a rock hitting her car. But the fact that such drastic measures were taken on a mere unconfirmed report shows just how on edge everyone was. The I-96 shooter had succeeded in one thing. He had terrorized an entire region without killing a single person. This was, in a very literal sense, psychological terrorism. Exactly what Michigan authorities would later decide to legally call it. Throughout late October, local police, state troopers, the FBI, and the ATF joined forces in one of the largest manhunts Michigan had ever seen. 38 agencies in total. They combed through the tips and physical evidence. An initial composite sketch of the suspect, based on fleeting sightings, suggested a man in his 30s driving a dark-colored older model car, maybe an old Zolero or a Toyota Camry or similar. This wasn't much to go on in a metro area with millions of people. But then, the big break came from doing something investigators always preach in difficult cases: re-interviewing witnesses. Sometimes crucial details only emerge after memory has had time to settle, or when fear subsides enough for clarity. In early November, detectives circled back to people who'd reported being shot at but were uninjured. And one of those victims remembered a detail that previously seemed trivial: a flash of a license plate. During a follow-up interview, an astute witness, who I believe was Jennifer Kubiak, recalled that the shooter's car had a distinctive Michigan State University license plate. Specifically, the witness described a black four-door car with a green S Spartans logo on an MSU plate. This clue drastically narrowed the field. Michigan's records could pull up just how many license plates were issued in the region. Investigators did exactly that. They compiled a list of around 200 vehicles in the area that matched the witness's description of the car, make, model, color, and had an MSU plate registration. Now, instead of searching every car in 4 counties, they had a manageable list of names to check out. Detective Ron Moore of the Wixom Police Department took one look at that list and noticed something that immediately stuck out. One of the cars belonged to a man who lived right in the primary area of the shootings, in the small city of Wixom. That man was Raulie Wayne Casteel. It was a name that hadn't appeared in any criminal context before. Casteel had no prior criminal record to speak of, but he was a 43-year-old local resident, and suddenly, all the pieces started to align. Wixom had been one of the hotspots of the shootings. 10 incidents were reported in the Wixom area roadways during the spree. Could the shooter actually be one of his hometown neighbors, hiding in plain sight? Police quietly began surveillance on Casteel and gathered more evidence. They likely checked if he owned any firearms, and Casteel, as it turned out, did have a license to carry a pistol concealed, but issued in Kentucky, not in Michigan. Investigators also learned he was an MSU graduate, which fit with the license plate clue perfectly. As they dug deeper, more red flags appeared. Family members had previously expressed concern that Casteel was suffering from mental health issues. In fact, his aunt told the Detroit News that the kid had problems, and he's not all there, describing how he was paranoid and believed the government was after him. She revealed that Casteel's wife and parents had tried to get him medical help for these issues, but when he went to doctors, he received a clean bill of health, and nothing ever came out of it. Those comments paint a picture of a man who was unraveling psychologically, a ticking time bomb, waiting to go off. Before I continue, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to help support the channel. It really goes a long way in helping us create these full-length documentaries for you. On the evening of November 5th, 2012, a joint team of Michigan State Police, Wixom City Police, and federal agents decided they had enough probable cause to move in. They raided Casteel's home in Wixom and arrested him without incident. It's not hard to imagine the relief and lingering disbelief of Casteel's neighbors as police lights flashed in their quiet subdivision. Here was an educated man, a husband, a father, being led away in handcuffs. During the search of his house and vehicle, officers hit evidentiary pay dirt. They seized 2 handguns, which would later be confirmed through forensic testing to match bullet fragments from the crime scenes. In fact, at least 8 bullet fragments recovered from victims' vehicles were tied to one of Casteel's guns by ballistic experts. The chances of that being a coincidence were essentially zero. The elusive I-96 shooter had finally been caught. News of the arrest broke the next day, November 6th, 2012, and a wave of collective relief swept across Michigan. Commuters resumed normal routes. That constant knot of anxiety in every driver's stomach began to go away. Police held a press conference confirming they had a man in custody. Quote, "We are confident that Casteel is the shooter and that he acted alone," end quote. As investigators worked to assemble a case, no one really understood yet who Casteel was, or why he might have carried out such a bewildering series of attacks. Even after his arrest, the portrait of the man remained hazy. As we said, he was 43 years old, married, and the father of a young daughter. He had a degree from MSU and had worked steady jobs. There was nothing in his past to suggest he was capable of paralyzing 4 counties with fear. To detectives and the public alike, he seemed almost too ordinary to do this. The truth of just who he was didn't begin to emerge until the legal proceedings started. What made the case even more striking was the decision to charge Casteel under the state's anti-terrorism statute, a first in Michigan's history. It was a reflection of the shock that had swept through the region. The shootings hadn't produced mass casualties, but they had effectively shut down an entire section of southeast Michigan, leaving residents too afraid to drive to work or to send their children on school buses. Under Michigan law, that level of intimidation did constitute terrorism. Yet, even with the severity of the charges, there remained a fundamental question at the heart of the case. What had been going through Casteel's mind during those weeks on the highway? Well, the answer came during his January 2014 trial in Livingston County, where he faced the most serious charges, including terrorism and assault with intent to murder. It was there, under oath and in his own voice, that his private world, one that had been invisible to almost everyone around him, finally came into view. When Casteel took the stand, the courtroom grew still. His demeanor wasn't that of a hardened criminal. Instead, he appeared weary, almost fragile, as if the weight of the past year had left him hollowed out. At first, his testimony was quiet and halting, But as he spoke, he unfolded a long history of fear and suspicion. He described a feeling of being watched for years, beginning after he lost a job in 2011. In his account, he recalled fearing that his former employer had enlisted the U.S. Army in a campaign to sabotage his life and his attempts to find work. He said he believed government agencies were monitoring his phone calls. He claimed that black helicopters had flown near his homes, first in Kentucky, and then even after he moved to Michigan. At times, he spoke about shadowy forces that moved from city to city, tracking him by car. Those ideas had been building, he said, long before the shootings began. But something about driving triggered the paranoia with overwhelming intensity. According to his testimony, traffic on I-96 felt hostile and deliberate, as if the vehicles around him were all part of the plot. He told the jury that he saw the drivers as pursuers, and the cars themselves as menacing shapes that closed in on him. At one point, he even referred to those vehicles as demons, a word that caused visible unease in the courtroom. In his own mind, it seems the shots he fired weren't attacks, but attempts to drive off what he believed were coordinated threats closing in on him from all sides. The prosecutor pressed him repeatedly, and eventually asked a question that hung unspoken over the entire room. Did he understand now that these beliefs sounded paranoid? Casteel looked down at his hands before answering. Yes, he admitted, they did sound paranoid. They sounded crazy, in his own words. Medication, administered since his incarceration, had lifted enough of the fog for him to realize that the world that he'd been fighting against had never existed. But even with that acknowledgement, he also admitted that he knew at the time that firearms were dangerous and that the public was terrified. This became a critical point for the prosecution, which argued that despite his delusions, he did retain enough awareness to understand the consequences of his actions. Casteel's defense team walked a careful line. They didn't pursue a formal insanity plea, which under Michigan law requires proving that a defendant was incapable of knowing right from wrong during their crime. Instead, they emphasized his profound mental illness, presenting evidence that delusional thinking ran in his family, and that he had only begun receiving meaningful psychiatric treatment after his arrest. Prosecutors countered that whatever turmoil may have existed in his mind, he still behaved in ways that demonstrated awareness and intent. He concealed the rifle, fled scenes without alerting police, and took steps to avoid detection. They contended that these choices proved he knew the shootings were wrong. Because no insanity plea had ever been entered, they also requested for the judge to instruct the jury not to treat mental illness as a complete defense. So when the trial concluded, the jury was left to decide if Raulie Casteel wasn't just the man who did it, that part was evident, but a terrorist in the legal sense. And it didn't take them long. On January 29, 2014, a Livingston County jury found Casteel guilty on all major counts, including the singular count of terrorism for the entire spree. They also convicted him on counts of assault, firing from a vehicle, and multiple firearms charges. The verdict was a resounding rejection of the idea that his mental illness excused his behavior. Michigan's Attorney General Schwett lauded the outcome. Quote, Raulie Casteel committed acts of violence that terrorized our state in unimaginable ways, and today, the victims of his shooting spree received justice. End quote. In the eyes of the state, Casteel was a terrorist, of a different stripe, not politically motivated by ideology, but by personal demons that ended up terrorizing innocent people. A few weeks later, on March 3, 2014, Raulie Casteel faced his final judgment at sentencing. Judge David Reeder sentenced him to 18 to 40 years in prison for the Livingston County convictions. The sentencing hearing was an emotional one. Several victims of the shootings spoke out about the impact of Casteel's actions. Jennifer Kupiec said to the court, quote, I am so thankful that Attorney General Schwett sought to prosecute this man on terrorism charges, because that is exactly how I and many of the other victims felt. Terrorized. None of us will ever be the same again. Her statement captured the lasting trauma that even non-fatal crime sprees can inflict. These drivers may have escaped physical harm, but the psychological scars, the what-ifs, the nightmares of a bullet hitting a child in the back seat, would haunt them for a long time. Another victim, Lori Ann Arthur, displayed a mix of grace and pain in her remarks.
Mr. Casteel, I do prison ministry. once a month, I have to see the heartache and the desperation of those women, and that hurts, and I just feel so bad for you. I need you to know that I know there's a God, and I hope you'll seek him out, but most of all, I need you to know that I forgive you. I just hope you get the help that you need.
It was a powerful reminder that the victims were human beings processing this trauma in their own ways, some with anger, some with forgiveness, and all with a sense of irrevocable change. Ultimately, Raulie Casteel went off to serve his sentence in the Michigan Department of Corrections. As of this video, he remains behind bars. His earliest possible release date is November 5th, 2030, almost exactly 18 years from the date of his arrest. He'll be in his late 50s by then. In the years since his conviction, Casteel has continued to pursue appeals, largely centered on his mental health. In March 2024, nearly 12 years after the shootings, the Michigan Court of Appeals denied Casteel's latest appeal, ensuring that his convictions and sentence remain in place. With Casteel locked away and the immediate threat gone, the communities along I-96 gradually returned to normal life. For Michiganders, the fall of 2012 will be remembered as a time when a drive down the highway felt sort of like entering a combat zone, when everyday folks learned what it meant to truly be afraid of a random act of violence. It left a lasting awareness that random terror can happen anywhere, even on the most familiar roads. Many of those who were shot at, and their families, likely dealt with trauma. Some could even drive the same route for months. Others felt panic at the sound of fireworks or cars backfiring. And I know exactly how that feels. The courage they showed in coming forward, testifying, and even forgiving in some cases, is remarkable. They turned a terrifying experience into a push for justice, and in doing so, helped make their community safer. On the flip side, though, this story is also a poignant case study in the importance of mental health awareness. Raulie Casteel was clearly a man in the throes of serious mental illness, and multiple people in his life noticed something was wrong. They tried to get him help, but the system didn't catch it in time, and it raises tough questions. Could a spree like this have been prevented if the warning signs were addressed more effectively? There's no easy answer. Not everyone with paranoid delusions becomes violent. In fact, it's rare, but this is an example of when untreated mental illness did explode into communal harm. It's a case that underscores why mental health resources and early intervention are so critical. If you or someone you love is struggling with mental illness, there are several broadly available resources you can turn to. In the US, you can go to findtreatment.gov to locate mental health resources in your area. In an emergency, calling 911 or your country's emergency number may be the quickest option. Many countries also operate national or local crisis hotlines, and if you don't know the specific number, you can contact the local health department, a hospital emergency room, or a general mental health helpline for guidance.